Now, the house that Bitcoin bought, that virtual currency, has translated into real bricks and mortar for one investor. A villa on the Indonesian island of Bali has been bought in the biggest Bitcoin transaction to date.
2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and even a mini waterfall. This luxury villa in Bali was bought purely with Bitcoins, making it the biggest transaction with the virtual currency ever recorded. The anonymous buyer paid over 800 Bitcoins for it, currently worth around $500,000. Initially cautious, the real estate developer who listed the property is pleased he gave the currency a try.
We've been referred to it by a family member who's been dealing with Bitcoins for the last 2 to 3 years. So we thought we'd give it a try and see what happens. And it worked out to be pretty good for us.
The estate agency had to work around Indonesian laws, though. Bitcoin is illegal there, just as in China, Thailand and Iceland.
Property in Bali bought using Bitcoin, but that the money transferred to the beneficiary account is in US dollar. So in this sense, we don't see any problems.
It took just 1 hour to buy and sell this villa, a process which would normally take up to a week. The speed of transactions is one reason why some people are turning to Bitcoin, but it's not risk-free. One website used to trade currency, Mt. Gox, was forced to close last month after it lost $250,000 of its users' Bitcoins.
Now, G8 minus G1 equals G7. It might sound like a children's math problem, but it's actually the harsh political equation, which means Russia is becoming more and more isolated from the West. The world's 7 wealthiest developed nations have canceled the upcoming G8 summit, which was to have included Russia and been held in Russia as they sought to deepen Moscow's isolation over its intervention in the Ukraine crisis. Now, it's to be replaced instead by a G7 meeting in Brussels without Russian involvement, as the threat of tougher sanctions is also rearing its head once again. In today's Inside Look, we'll be focusing on those latest moves from the G7 against Russia. And joining me today from Washington is former U.S. State Department official Jeremy Shapiro. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. The first real question here is, how serious is this freeze out of Russia by the G7?
Well, it's pretty serious. I think it's very important for Russia's self-image that they be sitting at the top table in the world and discussing with countries that they view as their partners the future of the world. And this is a signal from the G7 that, in fact, Russia's presence at that table had always been by their permission, and they're withdrawing that permission because of their actions in Ukraine.
Well, what do you read into Russia's reaction to this? It seemed at first almost cavalier, with the Russian foreign minister saying something like this was no tragedy, but then the Kremlin issued a statement saying it wanted to maintain contact with its G8 partners.
I think that the Russians have no real response to this. They in fact don't have the capacity to force their way onto this table, and I think it's a blow. It's not a material blow, but it's a blow to their pride. I think when that happens, Foreign Minister Lavrov it's a very classic response from him to simply say, well, it doesn't matter. We didn't want that anyway. The grapes were sour anyway. But I think that for Russia, it's an important symbolic problem, and they don't want to be isolated. And this maybe is not the type of response that they had been thinking about when they moved forward with the Crimea operation.
Now, you said that this was not a material one yet, but it just might be. There is this threat of more sanctions. How likely is that, would you say? And what about Obama's role in all of this? Will he push the Europeans to slap down more sanctions?
Yeah, I think that on the sanctions front, there is the first sort of byword, especially from the U.S. president, is unity. And what they were able to demonstrate at the G7 meeting was that they are on roughly the same page and that they will move forward together and in lockstep. Because frankly, that's the only way that the sanctions are effective. But where they will precisely go, I think, is left a little bit uncharted. I think they were able to show unity in demonstrating that they will stay together, and they opened up some possibilities of sanctioning various sectors, including energy and finance, but they didn't actually do anything. And I think if you really look at what they said, as the situation evolves, depending on the context, we have the possibility and we will consider ramping up and escalating our sanctions. But they clearly don't have a specific path forward. They're just determined to take it together.
That's interesting. It did seem, however, like there was some reluctance from the West, notably from the British Prime Minister David Cameron, who said something like, while the West did not accept the annexation of Crimea, it would only take these more severe measures against the economy. If Vladimir Putin were to go further, do you feel like there would be more reluctance from the part of the Europeans as opposed to the Americans on sanctions, because they would be hit harder?
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I think we should, in the context of today, what happened is they said, if the situation gets worse, our sanctions will get worse. Obviously, they're going to have to discuss, if that does happen, they're going to have to discuss precisely what those are, and that's going to be a difficult intra-allied conversation because they will suffer, just by the structure of the situation, the various countries, the U.S. and the Europeans, will suffer differently from imposing sanctions. When you impose sanctions, obviously you impose costs on both sides. And the Europeans, because they have much greater trade relations, much greater investment relations with Russia, will necessarily pay more costs than the United States. And so that's going to be a difficult negotiation when it comes down to specifics. But for the moment, I think at least what they've determined is they're unified on the principles.
All right. Thank you for that, Jeremy Shapiro, speaking to us there from Washington.